The weekly Cybercrime and Business Podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact to their business, and proactively address threats head-on.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hack Surfer's Weekly Podcast. Today is Friday, January 23rd, 2015. Joining us today for the podcast, we have Eric Sieberson, a Surfwatch Labs data analyst, Jeff Peters, the editor of Hack Surfer, and I am Matt Lightfuss. I write for Hack Surfer. To get started this week, I thought that we could start with the State of the Union address, and I don't know if, I'm pretty sure you guys watched or heard about it, but President Obama actually made it a point to have like a 30-second little speech about cybercrime. And he talked about the importance. He talked about ensuring a safe and, making sure that the future of the internet is, there for our children. And what'd you guys think of that? I was actually kind of excited to hear that this was being talked about in the State of the Union address, if nothing else.
Yeah, some people seemed disappointed that it was only a minute or so, but I thought that any mention was pretty significant. The State of the Union is a big deal, and he's got a lot to talk about. He talked about defending net neutrality, keeping the internet safe for business and for kids, and safe for children, all this stuff. But some of his proposals might be iffy. I don't know exactly what the status is on backdooring encryption and stuff like that, but any intention's good. Hopefully the results are good as well.
Yeah, we got, at Hack Surfer, we received a few emails just with different quotes from sort of different vendors and cybersecurity experts. And I'd say the consensus that I got from sort of reading all of them was that people are generally excited and happy that, the government's actually talking about doing something. But as always, there's, the worry kind of overreach and that, if you make harsher penalties, that potentially like white hat hackers could get prosecuted. I guess that's always sort of the case that's made. I was reading about Barrett Brown, who was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison for his connection with the Stratfor hack in 2011. And a lot of people are talking about that case because sort of in a similar vein, the judge reportedly indicated that linking to a file containing stolen credit card numbers, which is what Barrett Brown did, he said that's the same as trafficking in stolen data. So obviously that has implications for people, when you think about the Snowden leaks or WikiLeaks and journalists kind of reporting on that. I just thought those two were kind of similar in that, it's sort of the same concern that people are having. Moving on to some of the top cybercrime stories of the week, is there anything that stood out, Matt?
There was one, and I particularly like this because of my I can't stand Lizard Squad. I don't know if any of my readers have seen some of my content. I loathe them. But starting out here, I'm just going to talk about, something that I personally saw. Lizard Squad they've had a little bit of trouble here lately. They've had 2 men have been arrested with ties with Lizard Squad. One of them, they did not, I think it was the BBC reported it, and they didn't actually give the name, but it was an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old. Also, if people have been following up the Lizard Squad, they have a DDoS for hire monthly subscription service called Lizard Stressor, and that was hacked, so no one can use that right now. Any customer who subscribed to that service, all of their information has been confiscated by law enforcement. So not looking good for them, but I highly doubt that, that like they're wounded, but I'm pretty sure that you're still going to see them. And I wouldn't doubt if we saw some stupid retaliatory attack on some person because that's what they do. And anything else going on with them? Jeff, I thought before we started the podcast, you said there's something else that you heard that kind of was linked to Lizard Squad.
Yeah, I was looking through the Surfwatch Labs data, and sort of the top, I guess, new target from the past week was Aussie Travel Cover. It's a travel insurance company. And the guy who hacked that, his name is Abdilo. But he has ties to Lizard Squad. He said in an article, because he's been going around giving interviews like all these Lizard Squad guys do. It seems like they just want the attention. He's a 16-year-old in Australia, and he said that he was associated with Lizard Squad back in August, but he's not anymore. But anyways, what happened was he stole 770,000 plus records from Aussie travel cover in Australia, and they're saying it's one of the largest data breaches that's ever happened in Australia. But then reading this interview that this guy gave, he apparently when he downloaded the database, there was some corruption, so he's not sure if he actually even has the data or if he's going to be able to use it. And he said he can't find the usable database. So I was kind of laughing at that. Thought it was pretty funny. So it might turn out that this Aussie travel cover kind of lucked out because they had, more than 250,000 records stolen. But the hacker's saying that it's unreadable. And then also this same hacker on Tuesday, he was live streaming SQL injection attacks on various U.S. education sites. So he seems to be quite the publicity hound, so maybe he'll eventually get caught like some of these other Lizard Squad yahoos.
Yeah, that'd be great for me because every time I think of when Brian Krebs, and for our listeners, if you're not aware, Brian Krebs is not really impressed with Lizard Squad either. I think he wrote an article where he referred to them as Lizard Kids. And, when you kind of went over this, Jeff, that's all I was thinking about. Like, here's a 16-year-old bragging about, I did this, and yeah, he has nothing to show for it. So kudos to you, buddy.
Another thing that was interesting looking at the data was one of the most discussed new targets from the past week was this Wingstop restaurant. Looked into it a little bit, and it turns out that there is 4 locations in Texas and California that discovered point-of-sale malware on their systems. Some of it was from the summer of 2014, and some went as far back as 2002. The company said they don't really have an estimate yet on the number of customers that were potentially impacted, but they think it's just limited to those 4 locations and, the usual watch your credit card statements and given a year of credit monitoring and all that stuff. I just thought that was interesting because really, since Christmas, we haven't seen too much in terms of point of sale sort of cybercrime, and everyone's was kind of expecting that we'd sort of see a lot of breaches over the holidays, and we just really haven't seen a lot. This is one of the first ones that I've noticed.
Yeah, it's been this and Chick-fil-A so far in the new year is really all we've seen. So I guess chicken is the next big target, but this isn't a huge deal, I'd say. I mean, 4 locations. It's still just the principle of the matter, even if it's just 4 stores. Like, how have you not found a problem that's going back as far as possibly 2012? Anyone who takes credit cards, it's really time to look into this before you start seeing your name in the newspapers. Seriously.
I did an interview earlier this week with one of the co-founders of Glovely. His name was Hiada, and what surprised me about the interview, we specifically talked about like cloud-based retailing, and we went into security. And he actually gave us a few insights on what he was doing for security. And it didn't sound like he was doing a whole lot. And what really surprised me with it, I mean, I think he was doing, a lot of the basic stuff. He had this, I guess, attitude that everything's going to be okay. I mean, one of the questions I asked him was, so what do you think's going to happen in the future? Like, it's 2015, so I asked a lot of people, kind of like a cyber prediction. And his overall mentality throughout the whole thing was, yeah, we're going to be fine. And that surprises me from what we saw. I was kind of shocked that he said that. He's a business owner. He seemed very, very much aware of what had happened. So I was a little baffled at the interview. I'm not going to lie. I mean, honest answer, maybe nothing will happen. But, from everything we have seen, I think people really need to start taking this seriously. And we just keep seeing story after story pop up where, possibly since 2012, this breach was happening. And it astounds me.
Yeah, and I think to clarify, what I read was that like 2 of the stores had like a breach for a couple month period in 2012. They thought, or maybe it was one of the stores. I don't know for sure, but I don't think it was necessarily ongoing for a couple years.
I saw a report this week that I think it was Cisco's year-end report that said people are very confident in their cybersecurity, and then they have no plan, and they get hacked, and things go downhill very quickly. Basically, pointed out there's a big disconnect between a lot of companies' confidence and those companies' reality, and they don't realize it until it's their problem.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind, too, I think, is kind of like we saw with the Dairy Queen breach, late in 2014. A lot of these are independently owned. So, I mean, even if it's sort of a national chain like that, they might not have, one unified cybersecurity policy or way of doing things. It might be 300 different owners kind of all doing their own thing. So you're bound to get some people who are really focused on cybersecurity and some who aren't. I'm not really sure with this Wingstop restaurant. I've never heard of them before. So I'm not really sure what their situation is, but I think it can be easy to think like, well, why didn't Dairy Queen do something? Well, if there's potentially hundreds of different owners all kind of doing their own thing and they don't have a sort of a unified framework, then I think it kind of makes sense that stuff will eventually happen.
Yeah, I think that brings more focus though on the fact that when just the attention that people need to start spending on, this is a necessity in your business. And I completely agree with what you're saying, Jeff. But I think when you go to start up a business like this, we have to get this into people's minds that this is something that you need to think about. It's a necessity. It's just like a type of insurance. You have to have this in place in case something happens.
Moving on to the cyber tip of the week, the shoe retailer Office over in the UK, they suffered a breach back in May, and the UK's Information Commissioner's Office, they didn't end up finding them, but they were sort of back in the news because they put out a report and kind of warning them of different things. But what I thought was interesting as a good tip was the ICO's group manager, Sally Ann Poole, she said the breach highlighted two hugely important areas of data protection: the unnecessary storage of older personal data and the lack of security to protect data. So what happened was they had an unencrypted database that was due to be decommissioned. So basically old data that they were essentially storing, unencrypted, and that's kind of what led to the data breach. She also said that Office explained that removing the historic customer data from the database before migration to the new system was believed to add complexity and a material risk of data mismatches, operation downtime, and customer disruption. But then she just went on to point out that obviously, that's one thing that businesses should keep in mind is that having that old data, basically data that you don't need to keep anymore, is just, putting your company at further risk. So if you have old data, try to get rid of it. Obviously, the best way to protect data is to not have it. All right, well, that'll do it for this week's discussion. Coming up, we have an interview with Alex Gray and Nick Feamster. Alex is the CTO of Skytree, and Nick is on Skytree's Scientific Advisory Council and also a Princeton professor. And we chat about machine learning and different ways it can be used in the future to help combat things like DDoS attacks and other cybercrime.
Yeah, so Skytree's addressing the problem of sort of really bringing machine learning kind of out of academia, you could say, real state-of-the-art machine learning kind of to industry. And one of the big obstacles to that has been the ability to work at a very large scale, because really all the existing mature machine learning platforms have been designed for data that fits in the RAM of one machine, but no real company has data that's that small. So that's a big part of it, is making it sort of making machine learning work at industry scale. There's a secondary aspect, which is actually very, very important, which is making machine learning much easier to use for people who haven't done machine learning PhDs, for example. So the automation and really even incorporation of all those between the cracks tricks of machine learning, putting them all into a single unified platform, and then providing automation on top of that so that the system knows what tricks to do and what models to use and what parameters to use and so on. is all done automatically. It's a big thrust of ours. So bringing machine learning to the masses has been a way that people have talked about what we're doing. And an example of the kind of thing to link it in with what we're doing with Nick, you have something like cybersecurity, where that's of course a hot topic these days of great importance, and you can it's a great example of a very difficult machine learning problem that has very big data attached to it, and it's also very complex data in certain senses, which we can talk about. And so it really requires the edge of machine learning, various concepts that are truly at the state of the art of machine learning. And so, that's a perfect showcase for the kinds of things that our platform can do that you can't find generically. So that's been the kind of thing we've been doing with Nick.
I'm curious how this sort of ties into cybersecurity. I mean, obviously, without getting too technical, can you just maybe explain how, like, for example, with DDoS attacks that we were talking about before the call, how that would tie into sort of defending against DDoS attacks?
Yeah, I'll pass that one over to Nick. Nick's our cybersecurity expert, who's also a professor at Princeton.
Hi. So, fundamentally, the problem of detecting denial of service attacks and actually just internet attacks in general is essentially a classification problem. You have traffic that's good and you have traffic that's bad, or attack traffic, and you need to separate the two often. So this is basically by its very nature a machine learning problem. And the challenge often in tackling these kind of problems is twofold. One is basically identifying the features that are most effective at separating the good from the bad. And that's where basically you need a fair amount of domain expertise in computer networking and security. And that's basically where the many years of research that we've done also with Alex over the years comes to bear. So the first is sort of what features separate good from the bad. The second is that there's just a tremendous amount of data. So the scale of network traffic is quite substantial, of course. So you need fast, scalable algorithms to basically input these features to, right? It's not enough just to say, we know these things are good at separating attack traffic from legitimate traffic. We need a way of incorporating those into algorithms that can efficiently, quickly, and accurately tease apart the attack traffic from the legitimate. So that's basically how I would describe it. It's basically a marriage of the state-of-the-art machine learning algorithms that Skytree provides, with also the deep domain knowledge about how attackers operate.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting topic, because just on our last podcast, we were talking about DDoS attacks and how, there's a lot of these large companies like Microsoft, for example. It seems like attackers will tell them, we're going to attack you on this day, and then they do attack them on that day, and they still can't seem to stop them in terms of bringing down like a network like Xbox Live. So just curious if this is something you guys, like Skytree, and you guys are actually doing, or you have people kind of using it in this way yet, and you think that would potentially be able to solve some of those problems?
This has emerged so quickly, these very high-profile attacks, that we have a lot of inbound requests, and we are starting some projects, but it's it's a pretty deep problem because there's so many difficulties with it. So yeah, it's definitely something we're starting on with a number of partners, and some of it's in both the public sector and the private sector. So yeah, we have a lot of things in play.
Yeah, I guess just another interesting thing is I've seen a lot of articles talking about, big data, and especially in terms of cybercrime. I believe it was the attack on Target last year. There was warnings, but they kind of went ignored because, they're just so overwhelmed by alerts and all this data. So obviously, machine learning is a big thing that a lot of people are talking about. Is that something that you guys see as sort of the answer to that particular problem, or is it something different?
We were approached from, around this. The Target incident was a big one that prompted a lot of interest from various sides in to contact us. So, one perspective on it is from financial institutions. So, for example, the credit card companies. So they have unique data, which is about where cards are used and over what temporal sequence. And so that kind of data can be used to isolate which cards basically are probably the ones that have been compromised. And that can be used in principle to locate basically where a target type break-in has even occurred. So one insidious thing about the whole thing is that there may have already been a lot of break-ins that we're just not aware of. And how do you even know after the fact that it's happened, or have some guess at where it might have happened? So there's deeper investigation can happen. So that's one kind of angle on it with certain kind of data that you might not expect. But yeah, it all depends also for the reason on the reason for the attack. If it's one typical one is to steal credit cards, but there are the other reasons, like maybe the Sony attack. There might be different kinds of data that you would use to lead to inform that kind of investigation. I don't know, Nick, if you have a comment on that.
No, I think you summarized it quite well. Many of the sort of attack scenarios that you mentioned are very good use cases. I think another you mentioned during and after sort of figuring out basically what's going on, getting better awareness. I think another place where machine learning can come into play is actually in prediction. So basically some certain types of attacks require setup. So for example, if you're going to steal passwords, a common way of doing that might be to lead someone to a phishing website. In order to do that, you basically need to set up infrastructure, register domain names, for example. And with the appropriate data, one can basically see those kinds of, shall we call them, pre-attack activities. And if you're looking for the right features, you can also, in some cases, detect that an attack is likely before it even takes place.
I'm thinking like in terms of like industry sectors or, that would be interested in this. Is it mainly like financials and kind of like information technology kind of companies that probably have a lot of data? Is that where you think this will kind of start with? Or is there other things I'm maybe not thinking of?
I think you listed out a couple that I think are obvious, which are sort of obviously good places to start, like the financials. I would say basically, one needs to only look so far as all the recent data breaches to sort of to sort of realize that anyone who basically has a large data set that they want to protect should be paying close attention here. Two other areas that are worth paying attention to. One, of course, is any kind of web service, right? Increasingly, we are growing to depend on various kinds of web services for email, data, all kinds of services, right? Cloud-hosted types of things. So that's another area where it's increasingly important to protect. And then finally, I think basically another area that probably merits attention is areas of cyber-physical systems and, various, critical infrastructure, shall we say, power grid and the like. So I think those are sort of three sectors where this is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think any company that, saw with Sony, for example, just any company will probably face the problem or issue of leak protection. So, and the kind of data you would use there might include emails, internal network traffic. That's pretty much any company.
Yeah, and then we've seen a lot of like predictions, kind of coming out as the year ended, and a lot of people were talking about, obviously the Internet of Things and the explosions of, sensors, and just talking about how particularly like critical infrastructure, and different things are going to just have so much more information. So to me, that kind of ties into this machine learning thing, because obviously, 5 years down the road, if we have all that more information, people will be able to use it better. But I'm wondering your guys' thoughts on sort of like a timeline in terms of, do you see a point where like there's going to be like widespread adoption where all the enterprises are using sort of this machine learning technology to combat cybercrime in different ways? And just wondering like when you see that sort of hitting that point.
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly when. I mean, I think basically that's a good question. I mean, I think we're already starting to see that in some sense. I think for many years, security has been an afterthought because it's a cost center, right, for your operations. For sort of an event that's unlikely or of sort of unknown costs, which is it can be hard to sell, and people don't want to buy it, right, because they're sort of tend to be interested in the next new feature. On the other hand, as we see, these things can not only be public relations disasters, but also they can be incredibly costly to recover from. The Sony thing being, of course, the most high-profile example of that recently. But the cost of these things can go into the billions of dollars sometimes. So I think basically, increasingly, what we'll begin to see, if we're probably seeing it a little bit already, is think of maybe security products in some sense as selling insurance. You're protecting yourself against the rare catastrophic event that could basically bring the whole company tumbling down.
So I think machine learning itself is on the fast rise in basically all areas, but it still really hasn't penetrated everything, right? It's just beginning, but it's in areas like security, and it takes a lot basically of adjustment initially for any institution that hasn't been doing machine learning to start basically modifying and augmenting an existing process that's been done a certain way for many, many years to suddenly shift to the paradigm of machine learning and the big mental shift is really going from handmade rules, which are kind of easy to understand, and to essentially, roughly speaking, letting the machine make up the rules as it observes things of type A and things of type B. So that's a bit of a shift. It also requires some infrastructure kind of to exist. So to allow the machine learning to ingest that data and then have its predictions feed back in and create alerts and whatever. So, it takes some kick in the butt kind of to make an organization finally go over the line and do it because it's a new technology. But these cybersecurity things, there's so much, so many of them have happened recently. They've just really entered the public consciousness. That could really be the kick in the butt for this area as far as machine learning. So, yeah, I could very well, based on interest we're getting, I could very well see it being this year where we start to see some substantial investments in machine learning at organizations.
My final question, if I am a company and I have, I'm interested in, using or experimenting with some kind of this machine learning, I guess what would be the first steps?
Well, there are lots of things you can read on the web just to get the general concept of machine learning. I would say to go kind of implement something pretty new for the organization and that truly attacks a process in the company for the first time with machine learning, a process that is going to be a critical one for the company. If the company doesn't already have its own data scientists, and increasingly kind of all companies are hiring at least one, it's from what we've seen. So that's a trend on its own. But if not, then would call in a consultant probably, or a company like us. We provide a powerful platform, a unique powerful platform where and we also come with consulting. So that would be the typical path that we're seeing.
Well, thanks for taking the time today, Alex and Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for your interest.
Well, that's it for this week's Cybercrime and Business Podcast. As always, feel free to subscribe to us on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you listen. And for more information, check out hacksurfer.com and surfwatchlabs.com.